plants have to be healthy. Amara was just saying she wants to talk to Dick about a particular bacteria that infects a wasp that then means it's all female eggs, you know? And what is going on with that? Has it got to do with the health of the soil? And so, for sure, the health of the soil is a basis, and of course the soil's all full of insects too. But real quickly, the principles are, and Richard will pull this up and see if I miss anything, right? Disturb as little as possible, you know? Work your soil with plants. I mean, oilseed radish, you ever see what that can do to the soil? I mean, we've had oilseed radish get this big, go this deep. Now that's some tilling, you know, but it's just gentle tilling, right? It's just slowly working the soil out. And then it rots, and all that stuff falls in, and now you have this loose soil.
What kind of radish? Yeah,
oilseed radish or tiller radish, basically daikon. They're bred less for the quality, but they're bred to be big. And of course, later on, you can let some of them go to seed and feed the beneficials, you know. And a whole mix. What we've learned is multi-species cover crops, right? Every plant is pumping nutrients into the soil, right? It's getting carbon, and it's taking 50 to 80% of what it gets from the carbon dioxide and makes into carbohydrates with the power of the sun, right? Below the soil. 30 to 50% of that, it's exuding out to feed its microbial community. So all these plants mixed together, big, healthy, diverse meal, much healthier soil, you know? Basically, key piece, try not to have your soil bare. Try not to keep growing the same crop in the same place because you want to have this mix of different exudates. You want to take out different things from the soil. Some things are going to take more phosphorus. Some things are going to take more potassium. Try to rotate, you know? When they figured out rotation back in the Middle Ages, production went up, you know? Don't get carried away with compost. Use compost at first. Get your soil test. Make sure that you aren't getting way high in phosphorus, which is very common by using lots of compost. Building the soil and growing the cover crops on it. And once you've got to a place where you have a good balance of the minerals and all that, basically use your compost as the medium for life. And use your cover crops as your #1 fertility engine. You know, it's got the sun, it's got the perpetual motion machine. It can be pumping so much energy into your soil all the time. We're going to go out to the greenhouse, you're going to see. We now have our cover crops growing under our crops. You know, we sow our cover crops into our mulch, and it comes up. You know, and Jeremy just 2 weeks ago was like, Pat, there's so much good kale in there. I swear it's doing better because of the cover crops. I mean, the cover crops are just lushly growing underneath. There's no reason why you can't have your soil in cover crops virtually all the time. You know, you just need a little while to kill those cover crops down, put your plants in. As soon as they start getting big again, you can just plant your next cover crop right into that mix and keep it going.
Should you change up your cover crops from year to year?
And basically just do a great big mix and then you don't need to change it. The company I recommend for starters, you can learn from real easy because they make creative mixes, they give great service, and for small consumer amounts, they're kind of pricey. Everybody should go to Fifth Season and say, I want you to carry Walnut Creek seed mixes. And for them to be able to sell them, they're going to charge $12 a pound or something like that. You know what? It's going to be worth it because it's going to be this incredibly diverse mix that's going to come with the inoculant for each of the legumes, which is not easy to find for some of those legumes, and with mycorrhizal inoculant. And the average person isn't going to take the time to go out and get all that stuff, put it together, and put it out. And you might need a pound for the average small garden.
And they have this now.
No, they need to.
See, I asked them for Ray Steyer's mix, and they went, you know, we were at that conference too, Living Web, and we should probably do that. If you give us the percentages, we can do it. I went, you were at the presentation. You can't do this automatically.
You can mail order from Ray's, and if you're doing a bigger operation, and you need like a bag, then you could probably hook up with us and get on our pallet. You've got to pay ahead of time because we can't, as a nonprofit, front you money. That's some IRS law. But you can actually save on the shipping and get a whole bag. And if you got a plastic bucket and can keep it cool, if you use only 10 pounds, you could probably get that cover crop to last you for a good long time, for 5 years, if you keep it good and cold and dry. You know, and so use those multi-species mixes. Don't till unless you have to, but don't lose your farm to mugwort or something because you didn't till. You know, I mean, there's times when you have to till, but keep it at that. Don't just till because it looks good or it's easier to plant. Watch some of our videos. You can figure out the ways to do that without tilling, you know. Remember that you don't want your soil to dry out. If it's in a drought time, try to give it enough water that that top layer is not drying out so that the life can stay there. You had a question, Mark?
Well, I don't do tilling, but I broad fork.
Okay.
And is that,
Jeremy was just asking me about it. He said, you know, Jean Martin, you know, he has a broad fork, and all these people, they do the broad forking, and it's like, I think broad forking is fine. I think we can get one. You know, I think there's a time when it might be really useful. Like if you want to, we want to put rock dust everywhere now, right? That's a great thing to do for the soil. The more paramagnetic, the better. But rock dust is really good, and you want to put a lot down. You want to get it. You know, if you wait 5-10 years, the worms are going to move it down. The bugs are going to move it down there, right? But it's not going to happen overnight. You know, if you want it to happen faster, that's a good time to broad fork. Obviously, you're only going to broad fork where the soil can be broad forked. We've got a patch, the 3.5 acres. If we try to broad fork that, we'd break our broad fork and us before we could broad fork it. And it's not worth beating that soil up so you can use a broad fork. Work that soil with cover crops. Work that soil with multi-species of animals. You know, bring that soil to life, and then the broad fork can be used at times to get amendments in there, or if you feel like you have to have that soil really good for a persnickety carrot crop or something like that, then you can broad fork. But even broad forking is a lot of disruption, you know, and for you to loosen one place, you have to be putting pressure on the other side. So you're creating compaction. Whereas that oilseed radish, it's creating the most gentle compaction there is. I mean, those plants know how to do that. Plants do a better job of it. I think a broad fork is a fine tool, but I don't think we need to be carried away with it. And I don't mean to critique Jean Martin. That's a specific way to produce lots of vegetables really quickly, you know, but I'm hoping eventually that he'll look at, you know, the systems he has and decide, I can grow cover crops under my crops, you know, because right now he hasn't put that part in. And cover crops, you have to then learn how to kill them and manage them, but I think that actually could increase his, you know, so I think every system has its values, but we can also learn from every other system and put them together and tweak them. There isn't any one right way to do it. I mean, my favorite example is Jeff Poppin. Jeff Poppin tills all the time. He tills really intelligently. You know, he tills in ways that do very little damage. He uses way more compost than I ever would do, but he pulls out way more vegetables than the average person. And he's also doing biodynamic, which is a great way to make sure that all the synergies happen. You know, and look at biodynamic, look at all the different growing methods. Back off on anything that's going to be knocking down your diversity. You know, we finally all get how critical the fungal aspect is. We've been bacterial farmers and gardeners forever, and we finally get that the fungal piece is huge. You keep throwing all those high salt fertilizers in there, boy. If you add a lot of phosphorus, I was just talking to somebody who's going to be planting trees in the immediate future, and he says, I put a cup of phosphorus in each hole. Dan Hettinger. And I said, I wouldn't do it if I were you. I'd put the littlest amount you can in, and I'd probably try and put it not right where the roots are, but a little further out, so it gets a little boost as it's getting closer to flowering and stuff like that. And I put mycorrhizae on the roots. Because if you got all that phosphorus there, the mycorrhizae aren't going to do anything. The plant's not going to feed them if it's got the phosphorus. That's the deal. That's the big thing that it's doing. It does other things. I mean, the mycorrhizae also gets water, but the number one determinant thing is going to be phosphorus. Too much phosphorus, mycorrhizae aren't going to happen. So back off on all those fertilizers. You know, just pay a lot more attention to just like tweaking it small amounts. Sometimes you got a deficiency, you can fix it with a foliar. You know, and then you can fix it the next year with the cover crops. And that little bit of compost and things like rock dust. We had Dan Kitteridge here. He is into all these different minerals to buy and stuff, but he kind of admitted, you could probably just do it with nothing but urine and rock dust. And then life, you know. And indeed, I had Gordon, his wife is Rachel, and they both Rachel went to our homesteading workshop. Gordon went to Dan Kitteridge's workshop. Dan Kitteridge spoke where Elaine Ingham spoke. And so 2 years ago, Elaine Ingham said, all you need is life, you don't need anything else. I have all kinds of people coming to me with questions about that. You know, that's just one that's hard for people to wrap their minds around, right? Now I got Dan Kitteridge up there, right? Gordon went and saw Elaine, right? Now he's watching Dan Kitteridge, and Dan Kitteridge is saying to get all these minerals because the plants need minerals. You know, so which story is right? You know, they're probably both right. Yes, all you need is life, but to get that life to the perfect place where it can provide everything probably isn't going to happen overnight. Meanwhile, our soils have been demineralized. You know, I mean, it's going to take the plants getting deep down to pull those minerals up. They're all gone from from where we are. So while your life is opening up that soil and accessing these deeper reserves of minerals, you probably do need the minerals. You know, and so it's like you take from everybody. Same principle that we teach with farmscaping, you're tweaking. You know, I mean, one time I gave up a job basically. You know, I didn't like, try to keep it because they wanted me to put down the maximum amount of phosphorus to get to the ideal amount of phosphorus right away. And I was like, I just don't want to do it. Because I knew that 5 years later, I was going to have so much phosphorus that I couldn't use compost. Because the things I was doing was going to build the phosphorus. And so I wanted to put the minimum down to get a good response and then let the mycorrhizae and the life do it. And that's the way. The plant's pumping the sugars and stuff into the soil, right? Why is it doing that? Because it's a nice guy? No, it's because it wants to feed the things that are going to feed it, right? It needs its microbial community to keep it healthy. Some of those microbes are going to defend it. The trapped nematodes are going to keep plant-eating nematodes from totally wiping it out. It has to have that proper diversity for that to get there. If we try and make our compost the old way and don't let there be recalcitrant enough carbon to feed the fungi, all the great compost we thought we were making was basically fertilizer and bacteria, and not even as diverse a mix of bacteria as we wanted. So we had to learn that to get the diversity, we had to give them a diversity of feedstocks, and to not do the disruption, So you have, clay. Everybody goes, oh, I can't stand I've got clay, right? Clay's the worst thing in the world. Clay's great. You got a choice between clay and sand? Clay. Yeah, every day of the week, you spend the rest of your life heartbroken at how much material you put into your sand trying to build that organic matter and getting that stuff to stay there, I mean, the sand actually, as you try and do things in it, it's grinding up your organic matter, and your nutrients are just washing through. The clay is layers and layers, right? Microscopic layers. Why is it slick? Because it's all these flat layers. And those flat layers are microscopic spaces that are full of life, or can be full of life if you do the right things. You've got the root hairs, you've got bacterial colonies feeding out, the mycorrhizae hyphae. They're not going to hatch if there's too much phosphorus. They're going to die if you hit that area with tons of high salt nitrogen. You're wiping them out. Of course, if you use Roundup, forget it, But you're not going to use Roundup, I know that, so don't have to worry. But people are doing that. They're wiping out their fungi all the time. Peak oil, that's an issue, right? It's going to happen sooner or later, right? Before peak oil happens, peak phosphorus. It's coming down the pike. It's happening, We are using up our phosphorus. There's ways around it, but we're not ready for that, It's called recycling human waste, not turning it into toxic sludge. Got various other fungi and bacteria that act like fungi. You've got decomposing plant cells that are going to be feeding things. Mycorrhizae. What comes off of mycorrhizae is a glue called glomalin, right? Turns out that for the longest time they thought it was junk, right? Finally, this woman scientist, it's not infrequent that it's a woman scientist. For some reason, maybe they're a little bit more thoughtful or something, they wonder a little more. She looks at it again and she realizes, oh my God, this junk is sequestering 30% of the organic matter that's in the soil. So these fungal hyphae that if you don't have are sloughing off as they finish, and they have a glue on them that's like picking up a slug, the stuff you get on your hands? And that is what's holding organic matter. And that organic matter then is a home for the life, right? And it just keeps building on itself. And that's what aggregate is, right? Aggregate is all these fungi growing through and taking this mineral, right? Not sand, sand's not going to stick together, but the clay, and making, the clay sticks together and it's like too sticky and you can't work it and all that. But as it then has fungi stuck in between it and organic matter stuck in between it, now it's this world, right? It's the condominium for the microbes in the clay, and the food source right there that's stable, which is the humus, and the food source that's ready to be eaten, which is held by the glomalin. And now all of a sudden you got this dynamic world. Okay, so you've got that. It's all going pretty good, right? But you want to grow a bunch of small seeded things, and you want to be able to till it up and come through and flame it and kill all the weeds and have great production. The more you till it, the more you just wreck this whole thing, right? The more you smash apart all of that aggregate you carefully made. And now that clay, when it rains, it gets pounded, and then the sun comes out, and what do you have? You ever seen that kind of garden? Brick. Yeah, and then the rain, right now we have that problem. We worked the 3.5 acres a lot. We wanted to change the shape of it because it was just too steep and all. And right now we have a pond that fills up with every rain. We don't have the infiltration because it was a clay field that we worked a whole lot. And how are we going to fix it? We're going to fix it with plants and animals. That's how we're going to fix it. And we will fix it, But we knew when we did it, we said at least 3 years. At least 3 years before we think that can be treated like a field that we can do well in. So this is the cycle. You can just see it's everything. It's animals, it's fungi, it's nematodes, it's various soil insects, it's predaceous ones, it's shredders, sow bugs, pill bugs. They're shredders. They're out there detrivores. And by and large, they're not doing any problem. They're not causing us any problems at all. Once in a while, things get out of balance, and then they're a problem. And how do they come back into balance? Usually it's about minerals. You get the minerals right, and then they're back in balance, and they're doing what you need. The mycorrhizae fungi are doing their thing. You got protozoa, bacteria. All these guys are basically feeding on each other, keeping the nutrients in suspension. It's alive. The nutrients are alive. And the plants feeding from those mineralized nutrients that are alive, they get what they need when they want. You go ahead and feed them a bunch of soluble fertilizer, and you're basically overfeeding them. They got all this nitrogen, they got no choice. They kind of have to take it up to take up the water, right?
Heroin addicts.
Yeah. And then they're this weak plant with, years ago, Ron Anspan, Mountain Food Products, he came in, we were selling lettuce to him. He said, Pat, we lost a case of your lettuce for a week and a half. It was perfectly fine, we could sell it. We get a case of lettuce from California now. It took 3 days to get here, 4 days to get here, whatever. But still, we got 3 days to sell it and it's gone. And that's largely not because we did something magical or because we're good local growers, it keeps better, or we pick better varieties. It's because our cells were full of minerals and those cells were full of water. Grew really fast and the proportion, is changed. And so that's got to do with this, and you've got, when you have those mycorrhizae fungi, they are actually going out to rocks and exuding acid. And that's how Lane is saying, right, that they can get everything they need. You don't have those mycorrhizae fungi, bacteria cannot eat rocks, So you have to have the fungi in there to accomplish that.
They're the internet of the soil.
Yeah, and some people say the intelligence. My favorite story on that is from a Discover magazine in about 1999 called The Web Below. Scientists, woman scientist, creates a forest in her lab, right? She puts the two main trees that are there, a birch and a conifer, right? I forget which conifer it was, right? She puts them there with their native soil, right? They grow for about 2 years or 3 years, right? They're just little seedlings, right? She then comes in and gives each one a different carbon isotope so she can trace it, right? She then takes them and grinds them up, because that's what scientists do, ooh, right? She grinds them all up, right? And she finds out that the carbon from this little forest she made, right, has been moved around by the mycorrhizal fungi and by the fungi, right? So that all the trees have what they need to be able to make seed. Even the ones in the center that don't get enough light. And that it doesn't matter at all to the fungi if a conifer gave its carbon to a birch. It doesn't matter at all. It's all about the forest being able to keep reproducing itself. And the mycorrhizae are in charge there. And the forest is fine with it because the mycorrhizae are accessing the minerals and making sure that this whole thing works. I remember saying that I used to do a radio show, and I remember the radio show ended, and I'd given that rap on the show, and then when it turned off, I said, so the forest is communist. And the host said, shh, they'll cut it all down. I said, they already are. So that kind of mix is what you're looking for, right? That living, fresh organisms and residue is not that great an amount. The stabilized organic, we used to think it was much more. It's not as great as we thought. There's this active matter that's a big deal. And that's the stuff that the glomalin is helping to keep stable. And if you don't have that activity, it's going to go faster. It's going to wash away or not be there for you. So you're looking for that kind of situation to happen. And that's the rhizosphere. That's the life that's happening around each root, right? And it's just like, there's all this activity. And why is all this activity here? It's because of the exudates. It's because of that mutualistic relationship. And years ago, Chip Hope I was in a soils class, and he needed a credit for it, and he figured we all could learn too. We went to one of the very first NCDA or extension talks on organic lawn care. And it was pretty embarrassing. The guy just didn't have a clue. I'm sure he got told, go give an organic lawn talk. And he was an herbicide guy. You could just tell he was an herbicide guy, and he could talk really well about herbicides. And finally, the extension agent that had brought him out was like, so can you name a few organic amendments? He couldn't name any. He didn't have any, no. And so I mentioned, what if you grow clover in there too? That'll make nitrogen for the lawn. He says, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I said, if you can inoculate it, it'll be even better, right? And so at the end, I came up to him and said, maybe if you have more diversity in the lawn will be healthier because, the plants are putting exudates out. And he goes, yeah, we found that out. Plants have leaky roots. I'm like, that's not broken. That's not a leak. It doesn't need a plumber, Plants have intention. They have community, and they're working in community, and they're feeding each other. That's why you want the diversity of multi-species cover crops, because the more you feed, the more you have diversity. And newsflash, America, why are we such a dynamic nation? Because we're an incredibly diverse nation. Lots of energies, lots of skills. That makes for a stable, healthy, dynamic population. That's what we want. Biomass, that's going to change. It's going to go down as you get deeper, but as you do a better job of growing, it's going to go deeper with it. It'll change over time. You want it to change. You want to increase it, and you're going to increase it with cover crops. I mean, Mark was worrying that maybe you shouldn't grow cover crops because it was going to help the wireworms. And it's like, no, we'll figure another solution out to cover crops. You grow those to wireworms. We'll fix that for you another way. Don't not grow the cover crops, The answer is never don't grow the cover crops, or almost never. I'm sure we could find some time when you shouldn't grow the cover crops, but I don't know what it is. You're going to get an increasing total biomass as you get your plants to be able to go deeper. They'll bring the biomass down, and then there's just going to be more area for it to happen. And as it gets deeper, the plants get taller, right? It's in proportion. And interestingly, sometimes you can get it to go deeper by managing your cover crops. If you come through and mow things like Sudex, first thing you do is go down, And now we can have perennial crops that, you let them get big for, there's one Italian system that uses alders, and they let them grow for 10 years, and then they cut them. And all those roots that are out there, they then shed all that biomass, And then they come in and they grow their crops there. Before it was shaded by the alders, they were using them for forage for animals. Those kind of systems are the future. And that kind of research has been, there was one done on false indigo in Georgia 20 years ago. We have those ideas, we can do it. Basically, the only thing that's active in the wintertime is fungi. Bacteria, they're all sound asleep, nothing's happening. But there is still activity, and it is the mycorrhizae. It is the fungi. So that's what's critical if you want to make sure that the plants out there are getting fed and that things are still kind of alive. That's how it's going to happen. If you don't have the fungi, then it's going to be dead. And of course, it's going to be slower for the bacteria to wake up if they don't have the fungi to feed on. The fungi are helping to keep the life going, and it's going to be, the colder it is, the less activity. And in the heat, right there, where it's been really hot for a long time, it's going to go down too. They don't want the extremes. They want that, more moderate temperature. That's the health, that's probably a mite there, shredding something up or feeding on something. That's what we're looking for. And Meredith is lucky my eyes can't do it anymore. She gets to look at this stuff under the microscope. Of course, she can send me pictures, which I never can get too many of. I'm fascinated with this stuff. I wish that we could have done it when my eyes were better. If you want to figure that out, I hate these kind of graphs.
The back line is bacteria and it's purple, right? So what they're showing is in the Scotch pine forest, you don't have a lot of bacteria. What you're going to have is a lot of fungi. If you go to a shortgrass prairie, you don't have very much fungi because it's more of a grass system and the grass is more bacteriologically based. Then you go to a no-till system and you're getting a cross between the two where you're starting out with a cover crop that gets tilled under. And notice how your fungi goes back up again, and that's good. So even a no-till system, the bacteria was up, but notice the fungi are coming up, and you can probably raise that fungi in the no-till. In the conventional system, you have super high bacteria because the soil's just being stirred up all the time.
You keep chopping up the fungi, and actually, the prairies that haven't been disturbed, they're going to be higher in fungi because they have the fires, and the fires then leave char. The char is the perfect place for the fungi to have protection, and to be able to grow out from, and it's a carbon that the fungi can slowly feed on. So that they're going to have, the fungi, the original grasslands, they had their fungi. Oh, yeah.
The bottom line, what Elaine or somebody would say, because I've taken her course, in fact, I took it with Patryk at Highland Lake Inn, the forest is highest in fungal matter. So if you've degraded your soil and you want fungi to come in, you're going to have to let it come creeping in from the forest over there. So if you look out here and you see you've got that row of conifers, that's where you're really high concentrated. You've got 100 to 1,000 times more fungal-based organisms in that conifer soil. As you get out more into a typical tilled garden, your fungi are gone because you've busted it all up. What we're finding out now, and Elaine and these guys and other researchers, which plants are fungal based, right? Onions are fungal. Think of the plants that would grow along the edge of a field. Onions, strawberries. Your brassicas are actually fungal too, even though people say they're not. But he and I mean, good grief, I've grown enough broccoli to know. And actually, you think about when you touch those plants, they have a fungus on them. They have fungal relationships, right. So when you go from the forest to the prairie's going to have more bacteria. And then when you get to ag land that's all torn up out here, you know, in my neck of the woods on a day like today, you'd hear those tractors going, because today they'd be out tilling and getting things ready. Well, there's nothing wrong normally with that, but just realize what you're doing to the soil when you do that. You're smashing it all up.
Right around here, you see the tomato fields that they prep way ahead of time, so there's no danger that they can be too wet to get their tomatoes in.
Right.
And there's just, on windy days, there's just these thick clouds of the topsoil, you know, blowing off. But the fun thing to know about this is that class that Richard and I took, even though I don't like to look at the numbers and talk about the numbers, I like to do what it takes to get those numbers. And I remember talking to Elaine about how much mycorrhizal powder I should use for my plants. And she looked around, she said, you don't need it, you know? You have it. Right. There's no way you're doing these things and not having it, you know? You don't even have to worry about it. And that's where you want to get, you know? And then you can, if you're a numbers geek, which I'm not at all, if you can be, you can go take the test and, you know, get it, you can get it analyzed. Elaine will do tests, other people will do tests, and you can see what your soil life is. I want to see it, you know, but I don't need to count it. That's a big one now. A lot of people they're figuring stuff out by respiration. That's something we can easily measure. Meredith can tell you it's not a lot of fun to sit there counting microbes. You know?
Well, we're going to do a class next month about how to look through the microscope. And I mean, if you want to talk about quantities, you can, but you can get a really good qualitative sense of what your soil looks like just by peeking through and learning the morphology of the different levels of organisms. And that's what we do here all the time. We can take 1,000 samples. We don't have time to sit there and count and do 20 fields, count all 20 fields of everything. But we can certainly get a sense if the compost pile is good or if it needs to be fed or whatever.
Until we had a microscope, we kept making compost that wasn't any good. You know, I mean, it was good fertilizer, but it wasn't inoculant because we didn't have that diversity. You know, we were turning it too much. We had carbon in there, but that carbon was gone in the first 10 days of composting. And then if there isn't food for fungi, how can you have fungi? We had to put wood back in our compost because nothing else was still there. And we would never have done that. I would have never have done that because wood was the worst thing you could put in compost until Meredith looked and said, well, basically it's kind of a wasteland, you know?
Y'all will be doing a composting presentation before too long, right?
Well, we always do them. We get to them again. Yeah, Meredith is on a hot one. I think that'll probably be in the workshop next year, you know? But yeah.
We're working on getting the bioreactor guy.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with the Solvita test? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, we've done it.
The
We sent it off.
respiration?
Yeah.
What is that? Woods In Lab in Maine does it, right?
It's actually a DIY. You can
It's good to look at this stuff for sure. The reason why it's good to look at it is not so you can brag on the numbers or feel crushed by a number or something, but so you can be guided, you know, so you can realize I need to change direction. I need to do something different. I need to figure out what am I doing wrong. Mark and I just figured out what he's doing wrong is using wood ashes. Wood ashes are a very big gun. It takes very little to have a huge effect. The cellular constituents are real important. They're going to be healthy if minerals and your exudates and everything else are healthy. There's a wonderful movie we have to find again, The Life of the Soil. And it just shows all kinds of incredible stuff with dyes. We used to sit around at gatherings of like the few people that did organic and watch movies like that and just go, wow. It's a complex food web.
The screen shows how fungi invade the leaf tissues. Here, you see a swarm of bacteria feeding on fallen leaves, which are gradually decomposed. soil under the fallen leaves. Sunlight doesn't reach this far, a lively world of tiny animals which help decompose organic matter into soil. The young farmer applied numerous kinds of organic matter to the field to build a soil as natural as it can be. This will feed tiny animals such as earthworms to live more comfortably. It has always been said in Japan that earthworms till and soften the soil. Here's a pile of compost produced by man. What's taking place here is similar to the decomposition of fallen leaves in the forest. The decomposition of organic matter needs the help of microorganisms and microanimals like tiny mites. These microorganisms, seen under an electron microscope, are in the process of decomposing organic matter. These are microorganisms called fungi. And this is a fungus spore. These are actinomycetes, which become dominant as the temperatures rise due to microbial decomposition. At the final stage, the organic matter becomes a substance called humus, which comprises a soil frame. Countless complex microorganisms are swarming around it. This is aggregated soil containing plenty of organic matter. This structure is created by the combination of humus and soil particles, silt, sand, and clay. Polysaccharides, that are long gummy chains of sugars produced by microbial metabolism, glue them and form strong aggregation. The porous structure of the soil helps store the nutrients of the crops and hold air and water, providing the microorganisms with a comfortable place to live in. The soil containing plenty of organisms is actively attracting a variety of microorganisms that feed on them. Bacteria and other primitive animals are swarming around the microorganisms. Now let's observe a root growth under a microscope. Root hairs are growing sideways. A plant absorbs water and nutrients using its root hairs. What's now happening around the root? This is the growing point at the root tip. The elongation of roots takes place right here. The growing point is quite active in metabolism. The old sections continually peel off. We can see something still moving in plant cells which have come off. Then, microorganisms prey on them. Although invisible, nutrients are flowing out of the whole root. A large number of microorganisms are attracted there. They multiply by feeding on the nutrients secreting out of the root. When dead, the crop will then feed on their remains. seen around the root are bacteria. Numerous protozoa are also observed. Microorganisms survive by cooperating with the root, creating a world very similar to intestinal bacteria in human beings.
This complexity, that's what we do by doing the kind of stuff we talked about. In different ecosystems, there's going to be different complexities. A cave is not going to have a very great complexity. A desert is not going to have as great a complexity. It's going to be a different complexity. It's going to be interesting. There'll be life in the desert you won't see other places, you know. Grasslands are going to have a certain complexity. Shrublands are going to have a greater one. And then you get into forest and then the mix of them. And then you get to a rainforest and it's the greatest complexity.
One of the interesting things about this system, the rainforest, 90% of the matter is above ground. If you go to a grassland, because it's been sitting there, 80% of it's below ground because it's built soil. So one of the terrible things that used to happen when they would go and clear cut a rainforest in Brazil, the soil there is laterite soil. So it's this color and it's this consistency. So as soon as you remove the trees, that stuff bakes off. And you can end up with something like Angkor Wat, which is actually just made out of clay, but it's thousands of years old because it just baked off, and that's it. So once you get to a situation like that, or you know, down in the when I was working in Raleigh, and we could drive out to Creedmoor somewhere, and you'd see one of these old tobacco farms. You might as well you could make a roller rink. The soil's so hard, you know what I mean? You're bedpan walking around, and it's just as hard as it.
You could come in and fix that with life. Right. I mean, and indeed. The Amera Indians, terra preta, they took that clay and turned it into soil that was able to support, they're constantly reappraising how many millions of people lived along the Amazonian rivers, you know.
And the Mississippi.
All over, yeah. It turns out there were way more people and they were agriculturalists. They'd figured out how to make it work.
200 million people on this continent when we landed, and then we gave them smallpox from that.
Yeah, right. And then, so the first guy that went down the Amazon, you know, he saw all these big cities. He saw at the mouth of the river this huge wooden city. He reported it. They came back 100 years later and said, well, he was hallucinating. Nope. He just happened to have people in his crew that had smallpox.
Mm-hmm. So there's your different systems. What she's really trying to show you there is you've got your conifer system in the background that's got all your fungi. And then what you can do is learn to pull the fungi out into your growing crop there. That's really where we're at right now. All the stuff that we learned about bugs 50 years ago because we didn't need scopes. Now everybody's got scopes. They can go down in the soil. Now you got soil people talking like us bug people where they sit there and talk back.
That's the future. You know, the future is going to be that farmers are going to have scopes and computers. The technology is going to get better and better on that. And that's technology I want to see get better and better, and it's just going to guide us. It's going to help us to make sure that we're on track.
The other thing that I would tell you about this picture is you want to mimic the genetic memory of each one of these plants. So one of the things that Elaine was able to do, she was able to show, for example, that strawberries were a fungal-based plant. So they could go out and they would go into these compost piles that had wood and plant strawberries, and the strawberries were as big as my fist. And you guys know that now because when you go to Whole Foods, they've got these organic strawberries now. You know, they're in the same old quart container, but there's 6 or 7, 4 of them or 6 of them now because they figured out they understand strawberries. They understand the fungal base of strawberries. Well, as soon as you do that, boy, these strawberries are like, hey, I don't have any stress. Look at this fruit. So it's the same with each one of these. Probably back then, the reason that she's showing the coal crops in the middle is she's saying, well, that's really bacterial, so that's the stirred up area. And then as you get closer to the forest, you're going to get more into your fungal-based stuff.
I don't think we're trying to say that brassicas, you know, have a direct fungal relationship. We're saying that the fungi are as important to them as they are to other plants. It's just that they don't have a symbiotic relationship. They're not feeding them, and the plants aren't living in them. But that doesn't mean that the fungi aren't important to them. Bacteria do a lot of work. They're real important. We've pushed agriculture much too bacterial. You want those houses to be full of bacteria, right? And does everybody know how to tell if they are? Cut them open with your finger. They'll be brownish, reddish, or pinkish. If they're white, nobody's home. Use the inoculant. I mean, even if you've been using the inoculant, it's cheap enough that it's a guarantee. but if you don't want to, use it at least once or twice and get it established, and then keep growing the host. You know, and maybe not every time that you plant, but in my mind you do. You know, and that's why I like Walnut Creek, because frankly, finding some of the inoculants for some of the more esoteric legumes that you want to grow is not as easy, and they provide it, so it works good, you know. There are some bacteria that work like fungi, and they have their own important role to play. They can be, you can overdo them though. You don't want too many.
Okay, so the grass stuff in the front is going to be way more bacterial based, and as you go back into the forest, it's just going to go into fungi.
There are trees that can grow in something that's almost all wood, right? You see trees growing out of rotting logs. How does that work? You know, that totally is against our theory of what nutritional systems are, but actually it does. And why is it working? It's the fungi. And they might well have part of their hyphae way down in the soil and be pulling minerals up for that log. They decompose the carbon compounds, they improve the organic matter accumulation, that's the glomalin. They retain nutrients in the soil. Biomass of fungal hyphae is huge in the soil. It's incredibly important. They're food for the rest of the food web. Remember I said if the fungi aren't working in the wintertime, then the bacteria wake up. What are they going to eat? You know, if there's a healthy fungal life, the bacteria have dinner waiting for them. And of course, the mycorrhizae have direct relationships, and real important, they compete with pathogens. We grow tomatoes in the greenhouses so many times over and over again because that's what greenhouses are suited to. We're finally getting Fusarium and Verticillium and Phytophthora, and we graft tomatoes that we like to eat onto tomatoes that have incredibly big, powerful root systems. And those are resistant to pathogens. Why are they resistant to pathogens? I'm sure there are other aspects, but a major aspect is they're pumping out huge amounts of exudates, feeding incredibly diverse communities, and that is what keeps the pathogens from getting the upper hand. So that exudate part is critical, and it means that because of those fungi, the pathogens have competition. Elaine made the point years ago in a talk that Fusarium wasn't even considered a pathogen back in the 40s because there was so much diversity, it just couldn't get a start. And I remember saying to one pathologist, you know, there's these Fusariums for basil and stuff like that, and I know organic farmers that have it manifest, but it never goes anywhere. And he's like, oh yeah, well they're very Fusarium suppressive soils. And I'm thinking, well, maybe they're suppressive because the organic growers are doing what it takes to make them suppressive. You know, I mean, that might have something to do with it. That's just showing the mycorrhizae, which are fascinating and which you can't really see with your microscopes, right, Meredith?
You can see some of them, but you can't see all of them.
We know they're there if we do the right things, right? Ectomycorrhizae, it's interesting. When I first learned this, I thought that the woods were all ecto and the grasslands were all endo. Most everything is endo. I mean, the proportion that's ecto is really small. My favorite tree probably is the willow because it's extra floral nectaries, feeds plants early in the season. You can take the new growth and make a rooting hormone out of it, right? You collect the rooting hormones, right? And it has endo and ectomycorrhizae.
What's the difference between endo and ecto?
Endo grows into the root. And its relationship is in the root, whereas the ecto is on the outside.
So that's why you have your vesicles and arbuckles as they go into those. Okay, now, okay.
And so my game plan is to make a pussy willow. I have tons of pussy willow bin, right? 3 sides, and have it get tall enough that it'll shade it, and then fill it with leaves, and have 3 of them, and keep them filled with leaves. And so those leaves are going to rot down, right? And of course the mycorrhizae are going to grow up into it, right? They're going to be, you know, the roots of the pussy willow are going to grow up. They're going to have the mycorrhizae on it. The spores are going to drop off. And you go in and grab that leaf mold and you have endo and ecto mycorrhizal inoculant readily available whenever you use it.
And how close do you want to plant that to the garden? Is that something you put a little further away?
Well, I wouldn't take up prime sun space with it. I'd do it in some place where you couldn't grow food. This is called arbuscular, vascular and arbuscular. Arbuscular because it looks like little conifers, and vascular, it looks like a bunch of vessels, you know, kind of like the fasces. The fasces kind of vessels, a bundle of vessels. They're there. We know they're there. We love having them. They'd work great even if we didn't know what they looked like. Even though I can't see those mycorrhizae, if I'm doing the right stuff, I know they're there. And this is a system that works. And probably the driving reason why it is not as diverse is how much moisture. Moisture is critical. But that system gets moisture at certain times, and it makes use of it. It's not a dead system. Dead systems are ones that, you know, we create. And we do it. I mean, the Sahara is the size of it is because of human interaction with it, you know, and it can be reversed. Mushrooms, they're very important. That's a particularly famous mushroom. Mycorrhizal fungi.
And look how they hold all the particles around them.
Right, that's what I said. That's the glomalin. That's grabbing stuff, and even when it dies, it still does that holding. And if you grab a slug, you understand why. Protozoa and ciliates, all these guys are doing their pieces, eat other protozoa, eat bacteria, amoeba, means of a temporary foot. They move around, they're large. They're just, each piece is filling it. That's just like above ground. All the different pieces is part of the productivity. You need to have that diversity in order to have that productivity. You get an idea what the protozoa look like? Flagellate's got the little tail, moves it around. Ciliates, just
Hairs all around them, so they're just cruising around.
all these guys are out there working. And of course, any given tablespoon of soil probably has like dozens or more new species. We have no idea all the life that's in the soil. We haven't begun to categorize it all. It's just incredibly diverse. And each one is doing specific stuff. When I first got into biochar, this guy Danny Day's like, every biochar that we char supports different microbial life. And all the soils, all this stuff, it's all incredibly complex. And what we want to do is tweak it, take care of it, not try to recreate it. And that's lots of times you get told to do that, to come in and completely, tear everything up so you can make something good. Take you a lot longer. Mineralization and immobilization, you got nutrients stored in the soil in different ways. They feed on the stored nutrients. That byproduct, their dead bodies, their poop, that is the ideal food for plants. Inorganic nutrients usable by plants and are mobile in the soil. They're made available by the microbial life, by the mycorrhizae, by things like that. That's how this works. There's no difference between that 10-10-10 nitrogen and that nitrogen that comes from organic matter and stuff. It's like the difference is you have the life, and the life can take up small amounts of that 10-10-10, and there won't be any difference then. But usually there's so much 10-10-10 that you don't have the life, and then all of a sudden you're back to that same thing of the plants are being force fed, and they don't have control anymore. Now it's out of control, and you want that control. You want the balance that comes from the life interacting and from the exchanges occurring in a way that has to do with an innate intelligence in the soil. Earthworms are wonderful. They're actually not native to here. I remember having to talk with Josh Kelly. He was saying you really shouldn't have worm boxes because they're not native and they'll destroy the forest. And I wrote back and said, Josh, that's pretty interesting because every worm box I've ever had, I walked outside my house and collected the worms I put in it. And he said, yeah, actually, I guess what I mean is you shouldn't move them to virgin forest. It's like, yeah, don't put worms in virgin forest. But they're here now, they're part of our ecology. Humans are natural and we change ecologies, and then the world adapts to it. Hopefully we don't change them quite as drastically as we have in the past. But now we have worms and they're very good for what we do. They have their place. They're not good for virgin forest because they're going to drastically reduce the organic layer, and that's critical for the fungi and everything else. So yeah, we don't want to spread them any more than they are, but we're working with them now. That's where it's at. And they're good. And we have lots of them and we love them. We want to go down and play in the greenhouse a little bit, and boy, have we got a lot of stuff to cover.